The Emproof solution helps companies secure the software layer of their embedded systems, where protections are typically the weakest. As a supplier of software security, we see this as a watershed moment where companies start taking security of their devices seriously and plan it into their projects from the outset, or making it secure by design, as it's now commonly known. As we'll see, it's one of many global initiatives finally to try and make our devices as secure as possible. So, who are Emproof? We enable companies to protect their products from unauthorized access or malicious attacks and intellectual property theft. We have an engineering office in Bochum, Germany, and a commercial office in Eindhoven. Many companies offer security, but we believe we have a unique offering by targeting embedded devices, which are typically designed to have no spare resources, so security software has never really been an option. We can, of course, scale up, and we offer solutions to larger systems, which includes desktops, but our sweet spot is microcontrollers with limited memory and CPU cycles, where every byte still counts. Our main purpose is to allow companies to get to market quicker and safer by providing their teams with an easy-to-use tool that secures and protects their software. Cédric, would you like to briefly introduce Cetome?
Yeah, thank you, David. So Cetome is a really small company. We are 2 people, but we believe we are quite expert in what we're doing. We are focusing a lot on Cyber Resilience Act. So we are an advisory. We are not selling any technology, and our goal is to accompany manufacturers of connected products which are digital elements, to know what to do, when to do it throughout the entire life cycle of the product. So not only when you build it, but also once it's on the market.
Perfect. Thank you. So if you think about the security landscape, it typically takes the form of one of these well-established mechanisms. However, whilst these are clearly important, there's a significant blind spot at the software level, particularly at the binary level. Attackers are increasingly targeting this layer, extracting firmware and exploiting unprotected code. In fact, in many cases, the unprotected binaries are often freely available to download from websites or sent out by companies during updates or when they add new features. Emproof addresses this specific gap by focusing on binary hardening and runtime protections. For embedded engineers, this provides a critical defensive layer that's often overlooked in the design phase, especially if not mandated from the start. At the same time, as more and more devices are connected, the attackers are getting smarter. Reverse engineering tools are much more powerful and very widely available. And unfortunately, memory unsafe languages such as C and C++ are still the backbone of most embedded systems, which mean that memory corruptions regularly occur. This leads to memory corruption issues like buffer overflows that then result in such things as stolen data, compromised systems, denial of service attacks, and even gaining unauthorized privileges. And of course, bare metal systems and RTOS-based systems almost always lack adequate protections, as embedded compilers do not implement sufficient protections. And whilst memory safe languages such as Rust do exist, they are not widespread, and changing the entire development flow will be impractical for many years to come. That's why we take a layered approach. So Nyx prevents attackers from understanding, modifying, or exploiting your firmware, even if they get physical access to the device. Our binary obfuscation and runtime integrity checks makes it significantly harder for them to mount a successful attack. The actual reality is firmware is easily extractable. Attackers can download updates or use physical access to extract binaries. And from there, they use widely available tools to steal IP, extract cryptographic keys, inject malicious code, or even reflash modified code into your devices. Nyx will encrypt and obfuscate that firmware, making these kinds of attacks much harder. Now, for businesses, this isn't just about security. It's about protecting valuable product differentiation, brand recognition, and more importantly, customer trust. As companies' outlook on security is the responsibility of IT departments, companies were previously mainly concerned with problems such as networks being hacked, personal data stored on servers being stolen, or systems being hacked and being held ransom for payment. This is now changing. Older OT systems typically involve standalone devices that have been interconnected at the factory environment via a proprietary bus protocol. But as soon as these devices had a connection to the outside world, this became a very different threat. However, in most companies, a CISO or any executive that may be responsible for security was primarily focused on IT security. Any security of the product was at best the responsibility of the product manager, but in reality, if security wasn't within the scope of the project, then no one had responsible. And then once that product was in the field, well, the engineers involved in that design would have moved on to the next project. CRA is going to change that dramatically. Software developers, product managers, security leaders, and especially executives will all share accountability, and someone will actually be responsible for the devices sold. The problem is development teams aren't always equipped to think like attackers, and that's where Nyx fits perfectly. It provides a security layer that integrates into the existing development process. It brings enterprise-grade security to environments that have historically been ignored. So what makes Nyx different? It's the ability to harden software without rewriting it, which is especially valuable in the regulated environments. We focus on runtime exploitation and reverse engineering resistance. This means we're defending against control flow hijacking, information leak, and key theft, all at the binary level. These are threats that traditional defenses just can't catch. The majority of modern-day microcontrollers have integrated hardware security built in, which of course is a massive improvement over the previous devices. However, none of these really help with protecting what is often the most valuable part of a product, which is the customer software. Once this is compromised, no amount of hardware protection will help. Whether your devices are safety critical, connected to the cloud, or used in hostile environments, an additional software security solution is an effective way to reduce the attack threat. Another great benefit of software solutions is it never gets old or out of date. If you think about once the device within microcontroller has left the factory, the hardware is fixed and cannot be updated. The only option is a replacement, which is not really financially viable. However, provided there is a connection to the device, any security software can easily be updated to ensure the protections remain up to date long after they've been deployed. This is why security in the software state is important for all devices, regardless of any security protections. With that, I'd now like to hand you over to our guest speaker, Cédric, who will attempt to explain exactly where all this fits within the new Cyber Resilience Act framework and how it will affect every company selling into the European market. Cédric, over to you.
Thank you, David. So I'm going to move to the next slide. We're going to start with a quick introduction to the CRA. It's a very, very complicated regulation, but we're trying to make it easier to understand. Why do we need the CRA first and foremost? There's been a lot of attacks against connected devices or IoT, and most of these attacks would tend to abuse these small connected devices like your smart TV, your network cameras, and create botnets. So in the last couple of months, we've seen a huge increase in botnets. So there's been 11 bots with 86,000 devices used to launch record attacks. In January this year, Cloudflare has stopped a 5.6 terabyte per second DDoS attack using IoT devices. But it's not only about botnets. There's a lot of vulnerabilities in IoT devices because they would tend to reuse different bricks, hardware, software. And we can also find this kind of vulnerabilities in hardware or in microcode. So for example, there's been an issue in a chip, and this issue cannot be patched. So with the CRA, we're going to have a look at the next slide. So I'm moving the slide.
Yes, we are moving to actually one of the more prominent bug classes that for some reason still occur, especially in embedded systems. Yeah? And this is also one of the reasons why things are still insecure. Yeah. So Cédric already gave this example of botnets, and how these things are actually often exploited are via buffer overflow. So if you have to gain access to a device, buffer overflow is like a very common thing to get like an entry point. And what we have here right now is like a very simple example of how buffer flow happens. Yeah, so basically we have some char array, some string, and then we load some content into that string. Yeah, but the string has like a fixed buffer size. So this has been like fixed to 32 bytes in this case, to 32 chars. And then we load this very long string inside. and this enables an attacker to overflow the buffer. What happens, or one goal that attackers usually have, so then when this is here loaded on the stack and we have like this fixed size allocated, often the goal is to override the link register, which you see like on top of the stack. So this is basically a way for an attacker to get control of the flow of the program, so they can either like execute their own code that they have somehow injected, or reuse existing code pieces and then build their own little programs, which is often done via like ROP chains. So this is something that people use to build exploits. And buffer overflows have been like, around for ages, and they are not going anywhere, which is kind of sad because we know some solutions. There are stuff that you can do to prevent them. So one recent example from last year is from Bosch, where they found like vulnerabilities in several industrial devices from Bosch. And these were all like stack-based buffer overflows. And this is the year 2024 now. So they are still, or now we have 2025, but this is still a thing. So buffer overflows, especially in the embedded space, are not going anywhere. And if you look at more companies that do like proper vulnerability disclosure, you can actually find a lot more examples on the internet, and they still appear like every month. So what is the issue? Yeah, I think the main issue with all of this is C and C++, which are memory unsafe languages. And this is usually not a big problem on like, bigger systems like desktop or mobile, but it's still a major problem on embedded. And what we are talking about today is people will need to take care about these things, managing these things like these memory corruptions, like buffer overflows, but also other things as part of things like the attack surface mitigation, which will be part of upcoming regulations like the CIA. So Cédric is going to talk about that a bit more, but kind of why is this still a problem, especially on embedded devices? Well, the issue is that often we have like these old development stacks, for maybe functional safety reasons or something. And here the compilers, so things like GCC or CLang, LVM, often do not support basic mitigations that we know from, for example, the desktop space. So if we're thinking like about bare metal system, deeply embedded devices, there are still no secondaries. So like there are no buffer overflow preventions, which have been like around for 20 years. And some people use static analysis to overcome these things, but there are some studies out there that a lot of the bugs, I think the number, depending on the bug classes and the complexity, when we're thinking about C and C++, can sometimes be lower than 10% of the bugs that are found via static analysis. So there have to be like some other ways to deal with this. And I will hand over to Cédric, who will tell us more about these different regulations that are coming and why people have to take more steps towards like good security.
Thank you, Nils. Yeah, so indeed, there's a lot of issues related to embedded systems. And one of the big attacks in 2016 was called Mirai, that compromised all the systems to start launching major DDoS attacks against critical national infrastructure in the USA, mainly the DNS system. From that point on, government started thinking, okay, we cannot ask customers to secure their IoT devices. We need to regulate. So we started seeing regulation from the UK, from Singapore, from the EU, and from all these different countries where there will be specific requirements for people who would build or import or distribute systems, IoT systems, into a specific market. And the CRA is one of them, which is, we think, quite groundbreaking. It's the first worldwide regulation to impose cybersecurity requirements, not only to the end device, but to the product. So when we talk about the product, we're talking also about the cloud system associated to the device. We're talking about the mobile application. We're talking about third-party services. And as I said, we're not only looking at people who are building the system, we're looking at people who would potentially import the system from another country or another market, people who distribute the device, sell the device, sell the system. So they're called economic operators. So they have to comply with the requirements of the CRA. And one of these requirements is to look at the device after it's been bought by the customer. And after it's been bought by the customer, they must provide security updates and make this update available for at least 10 years. This is also an important regulation because we are not looking only at the technical requirements. We're not only saying you must not have this kind of reliability in the product, we're also explaining to the companies, the economical operators, what they need to do in terms of processes. They must inform the regulator, they must inform their customers, they must support the product. So there's a lot of high-level governance requirements that we don't see in the radio equipment directive, for instance. Another thing that the CRA is introducing is that the requirements must be appropriate to the risk of the equipment in scope, the risk of the product in scope. If you have a smartwatch like this one here, I'm not wearing it for the time, but if you have that, or if you have a smart meter, you won't have the same risks. So the CRA allows manufacturers, economic operators to adapt the level of security to the risks. In terms of timeline, we are today in 2025. There's a first deadline, 11th of September next year, where manufacturers must implement requirements for managing vulnerabilities, notifying regulators and customers, and also fixing these vulnerabilities. And there will be the application of all technical requirements, the 11th of December, 2027. You think it may be a long time. Actually, it's not. So let's have a look a bit more into details of what these requirements are. It's a very long regulation, right? If you want, I'm not a lawyer. I started reading the draft, and the text, the final text, is 81 pages long with 130 paragraphs of recital, 71 articles, 8 annexes. No one will read all that. Okay, we did it for you, but no one will read all that. And it doesn't explain how you can secure your product. It tells you what to do. So in this webinar, we're trying to explain what you can do to make your product secure. When you talk about a secure product, there's 3 key points. The first point is the day you release the product, when you start it, it will not get hacked because there are no known exploitable vulnerabilities. So when you start it, it's configured as secure as it should be by default. So they enable authentication, encryption, anything that will make the product as robust as it should be. Last but not least, after a while, you will have new vulnerabilities, you will have potentially attacks. So should there be anything happening to your product, it will be managed by the manufacturer. So that's what we mean when we say there's a secure product. This is what the CRA is all about. It's protecting customers. So of course, we started reading the CRA and we grouped the requirements. The first core requirement is developing a product needs to look at the risks. So we're not going to start developing a product and take a checklist and start checking boxes. We need to do a proper security risk assessment. The second part is, okay, once we've done the risk assessment, we will mitigate and manage these risks with cybersecurity requirements in the product. And last but not least, we have also to comply with what's called market access requirements. So potentially some product will have to be certified. Some products need to be tested accurately by what's called a CAB. So it's an accredited certification body. You must keep some documentation for 10 years. So when you develop a product, no matter the risk category of the product, you have to do these 3 stages. You do your risk assessment, you make the product secure, you build it securely, you verify it, and then you do everything else that's more or less documentation. Back to the product categories. I think this is really, really important to understand that we have 4 categories in the CRA. The default categories, the Commission, European Commission estimates that 90% of products will fall into this default category. It's basically smart TVs, light bulbs, thermostats, but they can be hacked. Like LG TVs have been hacked last year with 91,000 TVs that got hacked to gain root access. Then we have important products in two classes, class 1 and class 2. So class 1 are products that could cause risks on health, safety, security, like a smartwatch, a baby monitoring system, a smart lock. So for example, Ring has been hacked and attackers could actually monitor inside people's houses. Class 2 are products with greater risk and greater negative impact than products in class 1. So most of the products in class 2 contribute to securing products in class 1 or below. Firewalls, network interfaces, tamper-resistant MCUs, and unfortunately, they can also suffer from attack like firmware compromise in Qualcomm. Last but not least, the critical products. Critical products would cause a significant risk of disruption, and if I understand the regulation properly, they could potentially be used by NIS2 essential entities when they are critical dependencies to these people. So we talk about smart meters. We talk about smart cards. We talk about your passport. We talk about anything that if it is compromised, it would impede the good functioning of the society. And for example, Apple had an issue in that chip called GoFetch, where someone could just extract secrets and compromise devices with these secrets. So 4 categories. Bear in mind, one important thing. All categories must implement all the requirements of the Cyber Resilience Act. The only thing the categories will change are how deep you must implement and verify these requirements. So what are the ways to verify these requirements? With the default category, so we have the different categories here in column on the right, and on the left, we have what could be done. Basic self-assessment, this is new. You are not allowed to do that with red. If you are in the CRA, you can take any standard that would make sense. Verify the conformity against the standard, say, yeah, we are compliant, and then you can apply the CE. You have the presumption of conformity with a CE label, so you can release your product on the market. So that's quite interesting, but that's only for the default categories. If you have product from a class 1, you have 2 choices. The first choice is you are implementing what's called a harmonized European standard. This is being developed right now by Sensenelec and Etsy. We have 41 standards. I think there's 16 horizontal standards and 29 vertical standards. Of course, they will simplify. They will make 3 and consolidate the technical standards into 1. But the goal is you are taking a standard, you are implementing it, and then if you are compliant with it, you have the presumption of conformity. You can release your product. The second possibility, if you are not compliant with every bit in the standard, so for example, you have a system communicating with a legacy device or a legacy backend, and you cannot implement everything, you can still get the CE label if you validate your assessment, your tests, with what's called a notified body. So that's an authority examining your product and telling you, yes, okay, now we think this product is secure enough for a class 1 product. If you're in the default category, you're still allowed to implement these different solutions. For class 2, there's what's called a third-party assessment. So in the CRA, we have a conformity assessment body, a CAB, that will be accredited by different member states, and they will be the expert in testing these products under the CRA. This is recommended. So when there's a blue check mark, this is our recommendation. So we recommend this for class 2, but for class critical, even though you are allowed to do that legally, we still think if you can use what's called an EU certification scheme like EUCC, EUCS, EU5G. They've been developed with different levels of assurance. And for example, in EUCC, you can claim that you have a really, really high level of assurance. You've done a lot of tests. You went to the hardware level. So if you're producing a chip that goes into a critical device, maybe it's good to do that. Of course, this is still a work in progress. EUCC is available. The other ones, we're still waiting on them, but you have all these possibilities. Just bear in mind, you are not allowed to have self-assessment if you are not in the default category. So you have to do security. So how to secure these products in scope? We have tried to simplify again the CRA for manufacturers. If you want to implement the CRA, people ask for checklists. So we made a checklist, high-level checklist. You create secure products. Then, sorry, it's really slow on my screen. You make the installation of these products secure. You keep them secure once on the market. You make the relevant documentation at every stage. And of course, if there's any security issue in your product, you don't release it. At high level, okay, you don't need to know all that. There's a lot. There is a tremendous amount of things to implement in the CRA. This is an overview of what we think needs to be done. And in every box, there's more. So for example, if you do risk assessment, it's not only about evaluating the risk. You need to do a proper threat modeling. You need to have a framework for assessing risk. If you do cyber resilience, it's not only about protecting from DDoS, it's making sure you have degrading mode, maybe having backup plan, maybe training your team. So you cannot do everything. You should, but you cannot do everything at once. So you need to prioritize. And our recommendation is that you prioritize one element per, let's call them pillar. Focus on doing a proper risk assessment. Focus on securing your product by default. Implement secure updates and a coordinated or vulnerability disclosure policy, because this will come in 2026. Test your product with experts, with test lab, with cabs, and produce documentation. If you can do that, you will have a good level to get ready for the CRA. So how can we support you with Cetome? We are really, really focused in helping companies of all sizes. So we have developed a maturity model called Prosecco. It's available for free. You can check whether or not your product and your organization is mature. We recommend people following international standards. Sorry, so today we don't have access to the Sentinel standard. It's still under development, but we know for sure that if you follow existing standards, you will have smaller gaps to fill in. We have also created a tool called FAST that can help you identify the threat and risks to your products and decide what should be done. And if you want to implement a vulnerability disclosure policy, we have some insight online. It's quite easy if you follow our recommendations. Last but not least, it's not about following everything. It's also about training your team, understand the challenges, and have a sense of knowing that doing security is also good for the product and for the brand. So I'm going to give the floor back to Nils. No, not yet. Not yet. The key message, you don't have time to wait for 2027 because the CRA is not only looking at devices, it's looking at your suppliers, it's looking at your ecosystem, it's looking at the way you do things. Start now if you've not started already. The top priorities for us is that know where you stand today. No one is doing an insecure product. You for sure, there's things already being done. So try to capitalize on that. Try to understand what could be improved. Focus on our top priorities. And then once you start implementing things, verify it, because the CRA is not only about implementing security, it's about documenting it and verifying it. So from our side, we've been working a lot around the radio equipment directive. We've been supporting a lot of smaller and bigger manufacturers to reach RED compliance, and we will continue with the CRA. So floor is yours, Nils.
Yes, now you're giving me back control. So we actually went ahead and asked Cetome how we fit in, like, out of this CRA requirements that people have to fulfill, and asked them what boxes, or not boxes, or what like CRA requirements can Emproof help fulfill with their customers. Of course, there's, and I assume Cédric will agree, There's not going to be like one tool or one company or one software framework that you can just buy on the market, you apply it to your product, and then you're like 100% secure. I don't think that's going to be the case, because you have to take care of so many things, from not only documentation, as we have heard, but like also like monitoring things. So we really just wanted to know, how can we help our customers? What points do we address? And Cetome actually went ahead and did a mapping of our features in regards to the different CIA requirements. And something where we can really help people on the software security side, yeah, and I'm really talking about the embedded firmware that's running on like microcontrollers, is definitely the attack surface reduction. So if you think about like these different exploit mitigations, in the intro I gave this example of like buffer overflows, but there are like several other memory corruptions out there, and we can definitely help you address a lot of them. Of course, if your password is 1234 and you've hard-coded that, that's not something we can help you with, but we can definitely reduce the attack surface for the embedded software side. And I'm going to go into a little more detail on how we are going to do that in a second. But there's also like these things like incident mitigation. So in our software, which is called Emproof Nyx, you can also define things like a safe state. So if an incident has occurred, we can or users can define like actions to go back to like the safe states. So even like if someone attacked your systems, you can still recover from these kinds of attacks. So what do we do on this side? There's like mainly two things. So we do a reverse engineering protection, which ranges from different techniques like code obfuscation and data encoding, different anti-tamper measures, but also like detecting if a debugger is present. So all like tools and methods and algorithms that make the reverse engineering much harder. And then we have the actual exploit mitigations, so different techniques that you can insert into the binary retroactively, such as stack canaries, which are a good defense mechanism against buffer overflow. They are quite basic. Something more advanced is, for example, control flow integrity, which makes sure that the control flow of the program has not been hijacked by an attacker. And when it comes, for example, to the reverse engineering protection, it doesn't necessarily remove any bugs from the software, but it definitely makes the identification of vulnerabilities much harder. So the attacker, when reverse engineering and looking for ways into the software and trying to find bugs, the reverse engineering protection will definitely help to make this kind of things much harder. So exploit mitigations, yeah, I've mentioned stack canaries. These are these little guards that are placed on the stack. So if you remember the stack where the goal was to override the return register, these guards are placed before that, basically. So it's like a randomized secret value. And to get to this return address, the attacker would have to override the secret value. And basically the idea with these canaries is that you check if they've been overwritten or not. And if they have been overwritten, an attack has occurred, and then you have to like go to the safe state or whatever that you've defined. Control flow integrity, you have like this example here on the left, on the right. This is basically about detecting the control flow. So let's say here on the right, you see like that we've inserted the CFI, and there you basically check from function jump to function jump if the jump is allowed, and if we detect like an unwanted path in the program, basically, we can also jump again to the safe state. So these are basically two very crucial exploit mitigations that should be part of every embedded software. Sadly, for especially deeply embedded devices, and even like on some RT OSs or Linuxes, they are not, and there's no support for them in a lot of compilers. So this is something where we can help companies reinsert these, even though they are not part of their development flow yet. So when you think about it, Emproof has these two pillars of security. So reverse engineering protection, which is actually not only there to like hide bugs or something as best as possible, It's also there to protect your IP. So if you've developed very valuable algorithms and I don't know, competitors or, you know, some aftermarket people are like stealing these algorithms and creating clones and selling the clones for much cheaper prices. This is also something where we can help, because we can help protect the reverse engineering side of things here and the consequent IP theft. Sometimes, and this is not ideal, I think Cédric has to like close his ears now, people put in hard-coded keys in binaries just because there is no secure element to store them. So it shouldn't happen, but sometimes it happens because due to lack of other available security requirements or security possibilities of the systems. So if people hard code keys, we can also help hide those as best as possible. So everything reverse engineering related, this is things where we can help. And then the actual hacking protections, so these exploit mitigations that I've talked about before, these are like, this is like the second pillar of the security things that we offer at Emproof. Right, so just one more slide on how this works. Oh. Yes, so basically we only work on the binary level. Yeah, we don't ever see your source code. We only see the binary. Nyx can, like, you can run this in your environment, so there's like no server involved. So basically the source code and the binary never leave your side. So Nyx takes as input the unprotected binary, like you can see here on the right, and a configuration profile where you can decide which protections should be applied where. So either the entire binary or, you know, whitelisted functions. So this is all up to the user. And depending on the configuration, the overhead is usually around 10%, but it can be less if there is no space available. And still the security is quite good, but you have to then focus on the functions that you want to protect, which is mostly for the reverse engineering. The exploit mitigation doesn't have a high overhead, so it should be added to the entire binary. But the reverse engineering will add some more overhead for the runtime and the space of the actual binary. So there you have to be careful which functions you protect. And then the output of our software is the protected binary, which you would then, instead of this unprotected one from before, would flash on the device. So basically, it's like when you think about Nyx in the development process, it's like the last step after the compilation and linking are done. So it's kind of the last step in your makefile before you would go to the device. And we have different architectures that we support, from ARM to RISC-V to Tricore, but also x86. So we can really like cover the entire stack. And one thing where we are kind of unique is that we have a safety certification. So we are ISO 26262 ASIL-B certified, and will be, we are currently reaching for the ASIL-B until Q3 of this year. So this is something where we are well equipped, even in these functional safety scenarios. All right, so now it's time for a little Q&A. And like me as an engineer, I always have trouble understanding what I have to do. So I guess people will also have some questions on certain points, which I'm sure Cédric is equipped to answer.
Yeah, I try my best. So you can ask questions in the Q&A below, I think. So do we have any questions, David?
I don't see any yet. So one question that, you know, when I talk to people about these things that I often get is, what do I have to do, like, specifically? Because I feel like the CRA is so general in most of these cases. Yeah, and when I talk to others and engineers, we like specific things. And I feel like the CRA is the opposite of being specific right now in what you have to do in certain things. And it could be all, or it could be just a little bit. So how do people address this issue?
Yeah, so you have to follow the workflow. So when you develop a product today, you start by doing a risk assessment on the product. You need to do a cybersecurity risk assessment. And for that, you need to maybe do a threat modeling. So it sounds like fancy words. So it's just asking yourself questions. What can go wrong in my product and how can we fix it before anyone can abuse and attack the product? By doing this first step, it's really important because by doing this first step, you will be able to identify what security requirements you need in your product. So if you have a risk that someone can access the product from the internet without logging, you will put a login, which is called authentication. Then you will check online, okay, how do I implement authentication? You will follow a specific technical standard, you will do it. Then you've done your job. You're the engineer, you've done your development. You will pass it to a QA team to do the verification that it's been done properly. So there's a lot of people now who are working on developing a test suites for the CRA. You have test lab, we have the cab. You can do it internally. So you've done your test. Then you put the product on the market. You're happy. You are the engineer. You work on something else. Now there's a new vulnerability. Your cybersecurity team or your product compliance team or your product vulnerability management team will discover an issue and will find that, okay, the products we develop are affected. We need to fix it. They go back to your team and they ask you, okay, now you need to fix this bug. It's a bug. And then you do a bug fix. So it's not a lot for you as an individual engineer. It's a lot for a company with different teams, different engineers, different roles. But the CRA should not change what you do.
Mm. So, but basically it means like different departments and people have to come together to take
and that's the main challenge
together on this and not just a single engineer. Yeah. Okay, we actually got two questions so far. The first one is, how can we determine the product category or class?
That's very easy. It's done for you by the annex in the CRA. So you look at the annex, and if your product falls into one of the annexes, it is in this class. There is currently a consultation until next week by the European Commission. They're trying to clarify the annexes. So it's on their website. Have a look. You can comment. Sorry, apologies for that. You can comment. So basically, if your product doesn't appear in the annex, or your product category doesn't appear in the annex, you are in the default category.
And as we've seen on your slide, I think the more security relevant, also like to society, are the products, the higher the class. Is that like a general rule?
Yeah, that's how they built it. That's how they try to protect, to make products that would be affecting the society more or the economy more critical.
Okay. So the second question is, do end customers need to use only category 2 components if making a category 2 product?
So I would understand end customer as a manufacturer buying different modules. So in the CRI, you have a mechanism called composition. You are allowed to buy different components and to inherit from the security. If you are buying components that are the same category or higher, you're good. If you are buying components that are in a lower category or integrating components that are in a lower category, you will have to demonstrate that they are not affecting the security of your product that much. But bear in mind, all categories must implement security.
Looks like we've got a couple of raised hands as well. So
yeah, if people who raise hand are I'm not going to name names because it's going to be on YouTube, but if you can maybe write in the Q&A would be perfect, please.
Yes. So another question is, how do I know my measures are sufficient? For example, firmware update is available and firmware is provided as an encrypted package, but the key is fixed as there are no means for dynamic key exchange. Is this okay?
You will have to do risk analysis. So I'm sorry, it's a very high level answer, but you actually will have to do risk analysis to decide whether or not it is okay for your use case. Because if you ask people to download that on a USB key, maybe they can decompile it and re-encrypt the firmware. But if you have secure over-the-air update and you store the key securely on the device, maybe this would be acceptable. So without knowing the specific use case, I don't know. Nils, yeah?
Not ideal, but acceptable.
Not ideal, but acceptable as long as you demonstrate the risk is acceptable. That's all risk-based, you know, in the end. So that's depending on the product category, you could also submit documentation to a notified body, so you would have the confidence that what you are doing is legal. So even though you are allowed to do a self-assessment, you are still allowed to submit to a notified body. So the recommendation we do today for RED, and we will do the same for CRA, if you have multiple products, do 1, 2, or 3 products with a notified body. So at least you get confidence that what you are doing is acceptable for the regulation.
Okay. So actually, the same person who asked this question now came back with like, how should I do this? I
Yeah,
guess
like I just said.
you have to go to Cédric for this one in more in more detail. Yeah. But moving on, so do we get a certification from an auditor? How is this enforced?
Okay, so the auditor is a notified body for your product. You get the C label, which is a certification. There's another module. It's going to be a bit complicated, but in the CRA, you are allowed to do a self-assessment. It's called module A. Then you are allowed also to submit to a notified body. It's called module B plus C. So they would look at your documentation. They could also do some sampling of your products. And then you have what's called module H, which would allow manufacturers to certify their quality management system. So the way they implement security as a process to comply with the CRA. Okay, today I've not seen anyone doing that for cybersecurity because it's extremely complicated. It's extremely time consuming. You need to do a lot of documentation. You need an extremely large team. So people tend to go for module B plus C, they take the product and they will go to the notified body with the test, and that's the certification, basically. Notified body certification and auditor. CE is the certification, notified body is the auditor.
Okay. So I've got one more question that was sent via chat. So what do I need to consider as a business owner or CEO?
You need to consider the impact of not doing CRA compliance. That's the basic default, I would say. What happens if tomorrow your products cannot be sold in the EU? How big a market is it to you? If it's a small market and you don't want to sell in the EU, don't do CRA, fair enough. But how would it look bad? How would it look on your company? I think not that well. We had an example in the UK last year. The UK has implemented a regulation called PSTI. We have seen some manufacturers discontinuing the connectivity of a washing machine, and it went to the press and on social media. So it doesn't look good on the company if you don't want to do security in your product. And also you make secure products, so you make something that's actually requested by your customers. No one will buy, I don't know, a smart TV that will be hacked tomorrow. It's really expensive. No one will buy a car. Okay, cars are not in the CRA, but no one will buy a smart home device that will give access to your house.
Okay, I think we've probably just about used up the time allotted there. If anybody's got any further questions that they'd like to get in touch with us afterwards, our details will be on the invite, or you can use info@cetome.com or info@emproof.com. I'd like to thank everybody that attended today. I think we all can see that the Cyber Resilience Act is going to be challenging for everybody. There's no clear-cut way of actually doing it. Hopefully, as we've explained, we have some capabilities that will help you to achieve that compliance. But I would encourage you to get in touch with Cédric and his team as well, who can help to guide you through that side of things. With that, thank you very much, and hopefully catch you at the next webinar in a couple of months' time. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.